He's RoboCop. You need to look futuristic, but you also need the actor to be able to move in the damn suit.
Yeah, that's a big looking suit. It's a clunky looking,
The suit was kind of so bulky that he would wear pieces of it at a time for shooting. So anytime that you see RoboCop in the cop car, if you see the top of him, most of the time he's just wearing the top of the suit and he's got nothing on the bottom.
You know, that's an incredible coincidence because, you know, we're doing this video podcast right here, and most days I am completely nude from the waist down.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Hakeem!
Tamara and all our friends out there in the pipes that make up the internets.
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast where we talk about your favorite gadgets, gizmos, and conceits in sci-fi and fantasy, movies, TV, and even sometimes a video game.
Wow, that was an excellent introduction to what we do here.
Thank you.
I don't know if our audience is ready. I mean, this some heavy duty stuff.
We're talking like heavy duty as in like heavy duty machinery and mechanics and
with a face.
With a face.
With a face. That's right. That's right. Our machines this episode have faces because we're talking about a cyborg.
We are specifically talking about the cyborg we find in the 1987 classic, Paul Verhoeven's RoboCop.
RoboCop.
Thank you for your cooperation. Good night.
Yes. And let me tell you, in 1987, I turned 20 that year. I didn't know what I was I didn't know what I was in for. When my buddies and I went to see RoboCop, and man, we were loving it. But then, I don't know if you ever watched Amateur Night at the Apollo, but there was this comic who came out who based his act on RoboCop. Dude, that guy was amazing. No one had seen that before. A lot of people have copied him since. Mm-hmm. Amazing. From RoboCop and then a comedian. I mean, for me, as a cultural movement in my life, RoboCop made an impact.
Well, you are not the only one. I mean, the funny story about RoboCop is that they actually had a really hard time getting the film made, getting a studio to buy it. Everybody laughed at the title, but the joke is on all the people who said no, because it is now considered a classic of the genre. It has spawned multiple sequels. It has had remakes. It has had 2 live-action television series, an animated television series. It's had many comic series. So, yeah.
Yeah,
be careful what you laugh at.
Yeah, be careful what you laugh at, because these ideas, RoboCop, Sharknado, The Toxic Avenger, Monster in the Closet, these are all ones that you're like, surely you can't be serious. But then
I'm serious, and don't call me Shirley.
I love him. I love me some Leslie Nielsen. So let's get into RoboCop.
For those who have not seen this film yet, as it may be new to you out on the streamers, we are going to get into some spoilers as we talk about both the science and the story of becoming a cyborg. So if you don't want us to spoil anything, hit pause, go stream the movie, go buy it, go purchase it, find it in a theater, and then come back and continue with our show.
All right. Now, the first thing I have to let you know is that I have a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Because I am a cyborg. You're laughing, but it's true.
How so?
Yeah. If you have any non-biological parts that are a permanent part of your body, you are a cyborg.
This is true. Yeah. My mom just got her shoulder replaced, so she is a cyborg.
So did I back in 1993, early 1993. Yeah, so I have titanium in my shoulder. That makes me a cyborg.
That explains so much.
Oh, does it ever? And wait till I get my AI chip implanted.
Ooh, well, we're going to be talking about that. I wanted for people who may not be as familiar with RoboCop, I just want to give like a little summary to give some context for the conversation. So
Yeah.
basically, this film takes place in a futuristic Detroit. It's very much down on its luck. You have the
Wait. Let's hold off 1 second. Now, the movie was made in 87.
Yeah.
So futuristic for them was when?
They actually don't specify a year.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking for that when I was
Yeah.
when I was doing a rewatch, but they don't specify it. So it's just sometime in the future.
Yes,
Which-
the undetermined future.
Interestingly, now feels quite prescient, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So you have a corporation called Omni Consumer Products, OCP, which sort of dominates much of the Detroit landscape, including the police department. And they have come up with this idea, this new product, a RoboCop, which is a cyborg police officer that they ultimately want to replace police folks with as they create a new, shining, rebuilt Detroit. So that's the premise for it. And our main character is an officer named Alex Murphy. He's played by Peter Weller. He basically is attacked by a crime boss, and he is resurrected as RoboCop. So it's kind of the basis.
After a severe head trauma
Yes.
caused by a bullet.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if they're going to build a new force, are they basically building a force of zombies? Or they're like, hey, you're fit, you're healthy, you're intelligent. We're going to take you apart and rebuild you as a RoboCop.
So that is what I want to know as far as the science goes. How realistic is it to essentially take someone apart and put them back together again?
Let's talk about the science of RoboCop. And this science falls under engineering. And this is, there's all sorts of engineering going on here. We already do this stuff. Let me just, again, I don't want to bury the lead. We already build cyborgs. I am a cyborg. Yo mama a cyborg. Yo mama's so technological, she's a cyborg. So when I say we already do this, we replace limbs, we replace arms, we replace legs. We have a science that probably was not mature, or I don't know if it existed in 1987, but it's called brain-computer interfaces, right? And we're doing that. When you look at the evolution of it, you used to have these artificial limbs where there would be no brain feedback, right? You touch something and you don't feel, you can manipulate the world, but you don't feel the world. The stuff they have now, they have dozens of sensors in these artificial limbs, and so they can actually feel feedback, right, from their artificial body parts. Now, here's the other element of it. When you look at RoboCop, these aren't just, let me replace your body parts with new body parts that are identical. You now have extra capabilities. You've augmented your body, right? And so if you look at what's happening now in the world of robotics, there are exoskeletons that help you lift heavy things, that allow you to run long distances without getting tired. There's so much happening in this space. The world of robotics, the world of AI, they're coming together. We're making RoboCops as we speak, but they're not of the RoboCops that actually exist are not of the cyborg type. They are of the robot type. So how you have robots, androids, and cyborgs.
Wait, hold on. Break that down for people in case, like me, you might sometimes confuse them.
Yeah. So a robot is 100% mechanical. An android is also 100% mechanical, but made to appear like a human being. A cyborg is a combination of biological and non-biological parts, right? So yeah.
So would you say that an android is a subset of a robot since it's 100%
Absolutely.
mechanical? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what you see now, there are these androids with AI that are, existing in the world today, right? They're being displayed on stages to show people, hey, here's the research we're doing back here at our big tech company, and here's what's coming down the line. So you better be ready for this brave new world.
Well, they're humanoid, but we don't have an android yet that can completely pass as a human. We have humanoid androids, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that if you look at the advancement in them, the way they're now doing facial expressions, for example, that in of itself, that's a lot of human communication, right? The micro expressions that we make that illustrate different emotions and feelings that you're not outwardly expressing: fear, attraction, dominance. So, the opposite of dominance.
Well, and we also have a tendency as humans to anthropomorphize things. So like
We do.
even, I don't know if you have the little, the delivery boxes that are basically like the little delivery robots
Oh, yeah.
on the streets near you.
Yep.
You know,
On
you look
the
at those-
university near me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're literally constructed with the eyes and sort of a smile. Like you see them and you're like, oh, look at the cute delivery bot.
Wow. Yeah. Right. Now, of course, what also is happening is that in warfare, these things are being used, right? So they got these ground robots. They got the ones that are like dogs. They have the ones with, they're quadrupeds. They're the ones that are on tracks or wheels. So, there's a whole explosion of robotic technology in the current era. And so RoboCop, we're talking almost 40 years ago. And today it's looking like, yeah, we can do that, right? It wouldn't be you're nearly dead. I mean, it depends, right? You can think about the right situation, because a lot of the robotic stuff is giving people lost capabilities. For example, you've lost your limbs. So there's a great TED talk from this MIT professor who lost both of his legs, and he's standing there on his prosthetic limbs, and they are not the prosthetic limbs of the 70s, let me tell you.
Right.
Because, that's when I first encountered prosthetic limbs. They are not those. This cyborg technology is definitely delivering better than us. And can I see a RoboCop coming into existence? Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like with this, we're at a place where we're not quite as advanced as the RoboCop that we see in the film, but the groundwork for sure is in motion to get us there. And as we exponentially move forward in this area, we're getting closer and closer. I mean, I do have a question.
Yeah. We're going to be in all out Android territory soon. Who needs the biology?
Right. I mean, I do have a question about, so there's the physical piece that we're talking about, which is, replacing a limb, whether it's like your shoulder or my mom's shoulder, or, if, you lose a leg or whatever it might be, enhancing physical capabilities. But the other piece here that comes into play is the brain injury piece. As you mentioned, as we were talking about the setup, he's taken a bullet to the brain. And the fact that not only are they enhancing his physical body, but they are imposing, I guess, in Asimov, what would be termed a positronic brain. They don't ever really term it here, but they're literally replacing brain circuitry here and imposing not so much a personality, but a set of directives. As you see him kind of come forward in the film as RoboCop, as he's essentially reborn as RoboCop, he has a set of rules that he's supposed to follow.
That's right. Yeah, see, that one is beyond my pay grade. I don't know if DARPA's working on that, but
Why do I feel like DARPA is always working on these things?
If you can imagine it, it's happening. So
kind of, yeah, right? Well, and I was saying I may have recommended this book on a previous episode, but there's a wonderful book I love called My Stroke of Insight, which is about I think she's a neurologist who has a stroke, and because of her professional training, she's very aware of what's happening as the stroke is happening, and then she documents her return essentially, and basically how certain capabilities take over, because she's definitely got issues as she comes out of the stroke and is relearning how to do things. And it's fascinating, the neuroplasticity of the brain, its ability to adapt and try new things. It's fascinating.
It is. So, it's really interesting because with both my parents, I've had brain pressure issues. So my father had a stroke. He recovered from it, but he would have a situation where he had to have a stent because pressure would build up on his brain. But to see how his behavior changed, to see how his memory changed under the pressure situation. And the same thing with my mom. She has a benign, inoperable brain tumor. She's 80. And the impact that it has on her particular behaviors, and none of it's not anything drastic, but it's definitely noticeable if you know them well, right? You see the change, and it's not something that's a constant, right? And so I say all that to say, once you start poking around with the brain, I'm not sure what you can and can't do, because clearly applying voltages and currents and pressures to different parts of the brain yield different results. I don't know that they're predictable, but I do know that things change. And the other thing that could happen that seems like will be very straightforward is that, our electronic sensors are better in many ways than the sensors we're born with, right? I mean, the ones we're born with tend to have a higher dynamic range, and good sensitivity, but they're limited in some ways.
When you say our electronic sensors, you mean the sensors that we create, not the
ones we create.
Not biological sensors.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'll give you a great example. So I had a deal with a cruise line where I was, they're a celebrity guy, right, for this thing they had called Stargazing at Sea. And so they were like, hey, Hakeem, we want to take just before the pandemic, in the late 2019, we want to do a cruise to northern Norway called Searching for the Northern Lights or something like that, right? And as a part of that, you get the free cruise, but we want to give you a couple of lectures on the Northern Lights. So one of the things that I knew that I had to warn people about, I had never seen the Northern Lights, but I've done a lot of sky gazing. And when you look at images of the Northern Light, you see these vivid colors, right? And last year in 2024, the Northern Lights went south, so we all got to see these colors in our sky, right?
It was not visible here in Southern California. I have been foiled for so many different astronomical events over the last year. Like the Northern Lights, even though they came south, didn't come as far as Los Angeles. I wanted to watch the Quadrantids, which is a really great fireball meteor shower that happens in early January. It was cloudy here.
It never gets cloudy there. What do you mean?
At night it does, because sometimes you get ocean fog that comes in and stuff. So I'm hoping 2025 will be a little bit better for me.
2025 is a boring naked eye sky year in comparison to 2024, but you still might get some northern lights. But here's the point. The point is that the way your eye behaves, you don't really see those vivid colors the way your camera is going to see them. So don't expect what you see with your eye to match what your camera does. So what if I could replace, if I had another sensor, right? Our eye is a logarithmic sensor. The phone camera, that's an ancient phrase. I have a new camera phone. The phone camera is a linear detector. Mm-hmm. And it has color filters on it. It doesn't use the rods and cones and such things. And what happens is, it's only when you have a contrast of colors that they bust out with the naked eye, right? So if you have two colors present, suddenly they burst forward. But if you only have one color present, it could look white, just like a cloud in the sky. So imagine now I could augment my receptors. I have visible light receptors. I have infrared receptors. So now I have night vision. I can improve my hearing sensitivity, like the $6 Million Man. No, he had that. Wait. There was the woman and the man. One of them had the eye and the other had the ear.
I always get confused. There was the $6 Million Man, and I always get confused if that's and the bionic woman. Was there a bionic man, or was the $6 Million Man the bionic man?
He was the $6 Million Man, was a bionic man. So they're both cyborgs, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But one had enhanced vision and the other had enhanced hearing. And that's
wasn't it like that?
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly it. You watched it. So
my dad watched it. My dad was like,
I used to watch it with my mom. I love the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman.
So back to cyborgs, back to RoboCop.
Yeah, back to cyborgs, back to RoboCop. So if you think about the capabilities of RoboCop, what's different about him than our current cyborgs like me and the $6 Million Man? He's more robot than he is human, and he has that brain component that we typically don't have, right? So could you take somebody in his condition and do what they did in that movie? Now that is a stretch, but here's the caveat I'm going to make. If that person is able to regain consciousness and they have their torso and most of their brain, a good part of their brain, I think you could outfit them with limbs that they could control with their mind, because people are already controlling machines with their mind using these brain-mind interfaces, these computer-human interfaces, right? Computer-brain interfaces. It's just a matter of scaling it, right? That's what you're really doing. You're scaling it. And then you have this neuro technology that, that exists, but does it exist to that degree? Not yet, but it's certainly on the way. I don't know about the durability, because RoboCop, takes a beat and it keeps on going.
Right.
But everything that's being done in the movie is in some way already being done in the world of engineering now. And, it's advancing, it's helping people that have issues. And the idea of law enforcement or warfare type of bots, we don't have them in cyborg form. We have them in robot form, because if you're putting, you will consider a cyborg to be a human. So if you could send in a robot rather than risk a human life, that's what you would want to do. So because of the fact that, and honestly, the robotic technology is moving ahead of the cyborg technology, in my opinion, right? So it's you could build a RoboCop, but you wouldn't want to.
Well, that makes sense to me too, that the robot technology is moving a little more quickly than the cyborg technology, only because with robots, it seems almost a question of pure engineering. Whereas with cyborgs, you're bringing biology into the mix, and we still have so many questions about how the brain works, how consciousness works, what that interface is. And so it feels like that's why pushing forward on robotics would happen more quickly. So what is your final take on, does the science of RoboCop, of essentially transforming humans into cyborgs, does it fly?
Yes.
It does, but it totally makes sense based on the analysis you just did, because as you said, we're there. And to me, that's what's so interesting about the story of RoboCop, right? Because we're talking about a movie that was made in 1987 by Paul Verhoeven, who now we think of as somebody who's, done a fair amount of sci-fi. But back then, he hadn't done special effects movies. He hadn't done sci-fi. He wasn't necessarily even looking to do sci-fi. And this script got sent all around, and people were laughing at the title because they were like, RoboCop? And he actually got it, started reading it, tossed it aside, and his wife picked it up and started reading it and was like, hold on a minute, you should take another look at this. There's something in here. There's actually some layers in here. And so he reread it. And what made him take it on was the ability to explore through satire these deeper issues of, what is humanity?
Yes.
What are the boundaries between man and machine? How do our memories shape our consciousness? And a satirical look at the 1980s in America and the time of big business and Reaganomics and products and all of that.
Yeah.
So that's a lot that I just spewed out. So
You
to
did.
break that, I did.
Yeah.
I've been working I've been working with my daughter on, some of her English stuff as they explore essays. So my head is back and you start with the topic sentence and then you have a paragraph where you present evidence for each saying it, right? Okay, so let's start with a little bit of the behind the scenes of how this was done and made, right? It's 1987. They did not have a lot of money for this movie. And you did not have
Really?
This was
to do something so ambitious with a small budget.
Yeah, because remember, this wasn't a movie that people were vying to make. And so they had to figure out how to do it on a lower budget. And you also didn't have CGI like you do today. If you think about it, the script for RoboCop, I think, was being written right around the same time as the script for Terminator. So that's a movie people may be more familiar with. So if you think about that was the era this was being made
We're
in.
talking Atari 5200.
Probably, yeah. So
Atari was big.
Atari was huge. Space Invaders. So if you think about that, they had to basically use there was a lot of conflict over the design of the suit. They finally, because he's RoboCop. You need to look futuristic, but you also need the actor to be able to move in the damn suit.
Yeah,
so,
that's a big looking suit. It's a clunky looking. Yeah.
And it actually factored into the casting of Peter Weller because as they were looking for the actor to play the lead, they needed him, you think like RoboCop, big, da, da, da.
Right.
They actually needed the actor to not be so big so that he could fit into the suit and still maneuver on screen.
Yeah, and the suit isn't like a giant because when you put the suit on top of the human,
right?
Yeah,
well, and the size of the suit did cause problems. So it was basically like a flexible undersuit, and then it was essentially like a harness that you could hang pieces of this, what essentially like a fiberglass exoskeleton pieces on it. It was super warm. They were shooting in Dallas in like 1986 from like August through October, so warm, humid, not fun.
Not fun. Yeah.
And the suit was kind of so bulky that he would wear pieces of it at a time for shooting. So anytime that you see RoboCop in the cop car, if you see the top of him, most of the time he's just wearing the top of the suit and he's got nothing on the bottom. And then when you see him, the shots of him exiting the car, you'll see like the feet exit first.
Yes.
So that he's got that part on, but not the rest, because otherwise he couldn't fit in the car with the whole suit.
That's an incredible coincidence because, we're doing this video podcast right here. And most days I am completely nude from the waist down. All right, y'all, I'm joking. I'm wearing clothes, okay? I'm joking. It's not. I'm not RoboCopping it. I'm not RoboCopping it on screen, on camera.
Save it for Does It Fly After Dark. All right, so bringing it back to RoboCop. So let's get back to this story. So a few things to talk about. One is, they've created this RoboCop suit. And the idea, part of what I think sells the story is the way that they have him go through the transformation. You actually see him being turned after Alex is injured. You see his body being taken, and then you see him go through the transformation to RoboCop essentially as his consciousness is kind of clocking what's happening to him. So you basically see like the HUD, the heads-up display, as they're adding things, you hear what people are saying. You've got all these close-ups where like you see people coming in and looking at him, and you don't know, you as the viewer don't necessarily know what's going on in the same way that he as the character doesn't know what's going on. And so I think that really helps to sell this idea that there is something funky happening here. We don't know exactly what it is, and here you go. And then you see him emerge as RoboCop. The other
you just
thing,
gave me you took me back to when I first saw it. Your description just drew me in there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The other thing that, as the film goes on and he starts to reconnect with his humanity, the other thing that I think is interesting is when we were talking about the science piece of it, we talked a lot about the doableness and the reality of the physical piece of it. But the fact that the brain piece of it, this biological, neurological piece of it, is still very much a mystery. And what I like about RoboCop, that again, I think really grounds it and allows us to go, yeah, I'll totally go on that ride and believe what's happening, is aside from the fact that we know it's set in the future, they don't give us a specific year, so we're not pegging it to, well, what was really happening in that year and did we have the science? But is also the idea that they don't know exactly how this interface works. They know how the physical parts of it work, like his legs, his arms, his powers, whatever, but his physical abilities. But it's essentially a dream that kind of kickstarts his remembering of things and his getting back in touch with his humanity, as opposed to the dominant thinking being the programming that they have planted within him during the RoboCop transformation. So basically, he has sort of this dream, pieces of his past life, and that triggers something.
And you know what, Tamara? I want to interrupt here while you're on this part, because you talk about, in several shows, you've talked about how this idea was inserted into cinema and it sort of became the template, the trope. Mm-hmm. That idea of, I know you're in there somewhere, right? Where someone is possessed or some other way their mind is taken over, and you appeal to the personality that's still in there, right?
Yeah.
I wonder where that first showed up, that idea.
I feel like that idea, pre-exists cinema. I feel like it goes back, it goes back into story. I mean, even if you think about, like, take away the robot piece of it, if you go back to say like a creature story, I mean, Frankenstein's monster was put together from pieces, but like something like a Wolfman transformation, for example, like there's that constant question of like, who's really in there, the beast or, and that's obviously a transformation of an entirely different kind. But as you see RoboCop kind of moving through the film, he becomes more and more aware of these pieces of his humanity, of his memories,
Yes.
of his thoughts. And he goes to, at a certain point, he goes back to his old house and he sees pictures. He sees pictures of his wife, of his child, of all of that. And again, it triggers something in him. So, it brings up this question of what is this really? And one of the things he says that I love that again kind of grounds me in it is he says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, I don't have the specific memory, but I have a memory of the feeling.
Absolutely.
And I love that.
That is such a human experience.
It's such a human thing. So then how do you look at the cyborg and say you're not human, right? And so the fact that they sprinkle things like that throughout the film when it comes to the creation of RoboCop, the fact that how RoboCop works is still, they leave a little bit of mystery there. Yeah. For me, that keeps it real because we don't know how these things work yet, even 20 some odd years later. No,
all right,
40
let me
some
ask
odd
you a
years
question.
later.
Let me ask you a question then. Because you brought up the topic of, are you human? And the question then becomes, how do you define that? So suppose you have a human body, you're 100% human, but somehow I have a brain augmentation chip where I plug it in and now the AI takes over. So as far as mass goes, you're almost 100% human still, versus your brain is in a jar and then I put it in a robotic being and make you a cyborg that way, where you're 100% almost robot by mass, but you have your human brain, right?
These are the great questions of our age, right? Because is there a percent? Is it based on mass? Is it based on how you think? Is it based on where the thoughts generate from? Like, I mean, in the case of RoboCop, who actually, quote unquote, owns RoboCop? Like, because they've put this programming on him, the corporation actually says that they own him.
So that means, that's the thing. Does a cyborg have human rights? Because to me, a cyborg is a human. They call him RoboCop, like he's a robot, which would not have human rights, right? Even if it's like AI doesn't have human rights, even though some person was like, oh, the AI is...
Well, that's actually where you get to the other strength of RoboCop as a story, because it's the satire piece of it. So this is the 80s. Everything is all about like big business and tough guy and Wall Street and success and all of that. And to pardon a phrase, big dick energy. And so you see that in the way that they present the products that are coming out of this corporation, in the fact that they now run the police department, in the fact that there's actually a conspiracy between different levels of crooks. You've got like your white collar crime guy, you've got your drug dealer, and they're actually working in cahoots with the
police.
With the police essentially. They're working in cahoots with one another, not with the police. They're working in cahoots with one another to up crime in Detroit, so that there will then be the need for the company to produce RoboCops to keep the people safe.
And now they're working with the police.
Yeah, now they're working with the police. And I have to give a shout out. I have to give a shout out to the big baddie, Clarence Boddicker, who is played by Kurtwood Smith, who is a member of my theater company, the NTS company. So,
wow, nice.
Yeah. So to put a fine point on it, I think that there's a lot of reasons that this film has become a classic, and that's something that was first looked on really as a project that maybe was a joke or didn't have a lot of promise, actually has a lot to say. And the fact that we are here now, and it is more prescient than ever, and the questions that it brings up about humanity, about AI, about law enforcement and all of that, and I'll get to more of that in a second, makes it something that in a lot of ways has stood the test of time. And yeah, we can laugh at some of the special effects. We can, so much of this was done through stop motion. And, now we look at it and it almost seems like charming in a lot of ways. But the fact that it's got this underlying layer of satire about the time period and also these larger philosophical questions about who are we at our core and what makes us us, to me means I would definitively say that RoboCop flies, the transformation into RoboCop flies specifically because of the way that it fuels the story and fuels these questions that we as viewers come away with thinking about and musing over like the geeks that we are. And that leads to our third part of our podcast, which is always, does it fly for the vibes? So I want to take it back to law enforcement. So this idea of using cyborgs and or robots for law enforcement, what are the pluses? What are the minuses? Would this be a good thing in the world? Would this fly in the world? Does it currently fly in the world?
Yeah. It's levels to it is I think the answer. So
it's a nuanced conversation for sure.
There's a moral conundrum that I've had my entire life. Suppose we have a law like don't exceed 70 miles per hour. You don't actually need everybody to drive at 70 miles per hour for that law to reap the rewards that led you to impose a speeding restriction in the first place, right? You wanted to make things safer. So if you get some threshold number of people following that law, boom, you cross this threshold and you achieve as good a safety as you can get. And that happens, if you get more people doing it, safety doesn't necessarily improve anymore, right?
Okay.
Right. And so I feel like that is the same way with the mischievousness of humanity, the naughtiness of humanity. There are things that are like not necessarily to the highest moral standards, but if you feel like you're being watched at all times and you can't get away with these little micro naughtinesses, then it will lead to a bigger explosion. You know how it's like when somebody says if your parents are too strict, you end up with the young adult that just goes crazy.
Well, it's the whole Big Brother syndrome.
Yeah, it's like Big Brother. So so here's the conundrum. I want to be safe. I want to feel safe, right? So I've mentioned how often I've traveled the world, and I've gone to certain countries where I literally had to be driven around in a bomb-proof, bulletproof vehicle.
Yeah, I've had that experience too.
But when I'm out in the streets at night, in the middle of the night, I never felt safer. This is in a Muslim country, right, in North Africa. And I'm just like, that's that dichotomy. You trade a certain freedom for safety. And so if you're going to have, what they have right now, it's already happening, is they record you when you're out in space, right? And that acts as a deterrent.
Yep.
Right? And then when something goes wrong, they can call the authorities, right, to that location really quickly, right? And that helps to rectify. And by recording things, you can go prosecute crimes on the back end. It's like driving through Washington, D.C. A few weeks later, you get a ticket in the mail.
Yeah, they have that in LA too.
Like when I moved here, they were like, let me tell you, my NASA colleagues, let me tell you what's going to happen.
Yeah, there's a park here in LA that's like up in the canyons where there are these big signs that basically say, please observe the stop signs. You are being watched, you are being video recorded, and we will send you a ticket. And anybody, if it's your first time there and you're getting advice from friends about where to go, you are cautioned because I have gotten a ticket there. It's almost like it's automatic.
Is that the world you want, right? Where you have to be good two shoes nonstop?
So that brings up an interesting question too, which is taking that one step further. How automatic do we want our law enforcement to be versus how much human judgment do we want, right? So if everything is automatic, no matter what, you roll through that stop sign, you get the ticket. No matter what, you do this infraction, it results in this. On one hand, the plus is one might say it's more equal. You're potentially taking bias out of the system.
And you can take fear out of the system.
You take fear out of the system. You're treating everyone the same. It's just based on the data and the facts.
Right.
On the negative side, every every situation has its own story and its own context. And if you make it automatic, you take away context.
Well, I think it depends on who you are, right? If you feel like the system is against you,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to feel like it, whether it's human or automatic, right?
Right. Well, that goes to like programming the
Yeah.
algorithm. And that, I mean,
Yeah.
I was thinking about that when you were talking about, being in foreign countries and when you're safe and when you're not and how you walk
Right.
around. I mean, like, let's just put it out there. Like, I, as a white woman, walk through the world very differently than you do as a Black man. I, as a small woman, walk through the world very differently than you do as a much larger, stronger, muscular male. Like, and each of those things factors when we feel safe. The bias in the system, like your experience of law enforcement because of some crappy things in our country is,
Is where I am.
yeah. So, I hope it's okay to say that, but I think I'm.
No, it
we're on
is
the same
okay.
page.
And, it's funny because when I moved to California, at the age of 24, they had a reputation of the police being hard on, minorities. And I'm like, man, this ain't nothing compared to Mississippi. Like literally, from the time I stepped foot behind a car, I got my license at 15, was driving from 13, 14. Man, you go through town, you're getting stopped at night. The number of times I was face down, getting my pocket searched, it was regular, right?
Yeah.
I moved to California, it didn't really happen like that so much. Maybe the encounters escalate more quickly or something. But how you walk through the world definitely matters. And once I realized my big guyness was it was like a whew, but also age, right? I was big when I was 22, 23, but you go out into the world, you're getting confronted, right? Especially at that time period, it was a crack cocaine era.
Yeah.
You out in the world, some other dude's mean mugging you, right? The whole territory, you're not from my hood type stuff, right?
Right.
But and so that's why I say, it's contextual, right? The answer is contextual. So here in America, the one thing we look at, as I look at it, is I'm like, okay, we need to do something different about the training of law enforcement. It seems like there's an idea that they're in they are in a ton of danger, but it seems like when you look at when things go wrong, there's often a perceived danger that wasn't necessarily there, right? It was an unarmed person, and then the mindset of what you expect based on your training, and then the mindset of how you react based on your training.
Yeah.
Now, if you put this into an algorithm that a robot follows, your error rate is going to go down. It's like having a cashier key in the answer versus swiping a barcode, right? It reduces the error rate. And so it matters though. So it's sort of like when we had this big conference back in the day over what to do about the Hubble Space Telescope, because the original idea was you grab it, put it in the bay of the space shuttle, bring it to Earth, stick it in the Smithsonian. Then you have the second shuttle disaster, and it's like, no, there's no way we're going to risk lives to do that. And they're like, okay, then you're just going to let it deorbit on its own? Oh, but what if a chunk of it hits someone? The probability of that is really low, like incredibly low, hits someone and kills them. It's only an issue because it's not a field where people are harmed frequently. If people are harmed frequently in the field, right, then another person being harmed isn't looked at as catastrophically, as quite the same way. So if you have a human making error versus the state programmed robot making the error that causes someone their life, you look at it very differently. Just like when an agent of the state, a police officer, is seemed to be unjustly take someone's life versus a citizen doing it, you don't apply the same standard because one is an agent of the state, right? Mm-hmm. So now if you have, so it's really a conundrum, right? And it's one of those things like self-driving cars to me. It's like, okay.
They scare the crap out of me. I am not a fan.
Right, but they should be less error prone than a human behind the wheel.
Right. They should be. They absolutely should be. But then, so really what it all comes back to is the programming. If you are, and trust. If you are programming, if you are programming a law enforcement agent, I'll use that sort of nebulous word, whatever it is, a cyborg, an android, a robot, the programming has to work for the good of humanity. And there's got to be a way, I think, you've got to trust the people doing the programming or doing the training. And then at the same time, also, you've got to be able to allow for some kind of context to play into things. And whether that happens at the level of the RoboCop that's interfacing with the humans, or if in certain cases a replay or a trial or an after the fact, like there's got to be a way to include that, because if it's all just bits and bytes and data, that completely takes the humanity out of it. My gut says that doesn't work.
My gut
Very
too.
unscientific, doesn't work. That said, I do think that there are times when the bits and the bytes and the data are the least biased way to do that if you start with good programming to begin with. So I think it's a combination.
It is a combination. But here's how it's going to manifest, I imagine, is that you roll it out slowly, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually, so if you look at all of these things right now, whether you're talking about military drones, whether you're talking about police drones, the people that make these and manufacture these and are using these, whenever they make a video or an informational communication about it, they always say near the end that the final decision making is being done by a human, right? Those days are going to come to an end when that clause is there, right? Because it is going to move, but they're going to convince us, through statistic, we've deployed this many times, and here's what we found. The data shows we can do it safely. This is what we're going to do. Mm-hmm. So how do we put this to a does it fly question?
Well, I think the question, if we go back to the original question we posed, does it fly to have cyborgs as part of law enforcement? My answer would be it flies as long as you've got a human co-pilot as part of the process.
Yeah, I think that is where we have landed in terms of the authorities that are actually doing it. That is how they. Yeah. And I imagine that they, there's somebody in the loop. Let me bring this to another point, right? Because you're talking about trusting the programmer. So I've been a part of large corporations, been a part of universities, been a part of the military, been a part of the federal government.
So I don't trust you at all.
Well, here's the point. They're all manned by humans, right? Yeah. And of course, the culture within those humans reflects leadership and, the documentation the values that you claim your organization are about, right? All of that and follows. And I typically see good people, right? When I was in the federal government, I saw good people but I'm in a biased sample because my stuff is always around science. Mm-hmm. It's very rarely around profit. When I was in profit spaces in the corporation, there were some evil asses, but there were a lot of good people.
Yeah.
It's all about the bottom line, right? They exist for sure, right? But also still a lot of good people. How do you put in the checks and balances to get the good without the bad? That's the question.
Yeah. And that's honestly, I don't think we've answered that yet. So I would say flying with checks and balances. Yeah, because there is some benefit here, but I don't think we know the answer to that yet, which is the scary part because this is happening right now.
Humans will human.
Humans will human.
Humans will human. And we're clever at working things out. So ultimately, we're going to go into the future with our robots and we're going to thrive. That is my prediction.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into Does It Fly? You can find out more about this topic and others at doesitflypod.com, where our producers do an incredible job of talking about some of the things that we have talked about here and putting links and references and all kinds of stuff. If you want a deeper dive, Hakeem, where can they find us on socials?
Oh, yeah. You can find us on TikTok at Does It Fly Pod. You can find us on Instagram, Does It Fly Pod. And Tamara and I, we both have our own socials. If you go to our website, doesitflypod.com, there are links there with our beautiful avatars. Your, what do we call me? Your mad scientist?
Your mad scientist.
And my brilliant, beautiful, comprehensive, dig deep into the details partner, Tamara Krinsky.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank all of you for listening. If you have ideas for future topics that you would like to see, put them in the comments. And if you have stuff here from this episode that you'd like to discuss further, let us know. We'd love to know what you think about a cyborg police force as well as the future of being human. We drop new episodes every Friday, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.